Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be addressing middle childhood development from a biosocial perspective. For this, we're going to be really looking at kids about 7 years old to the onset of puberty, so right before puberty. And the book is pretty clear about this. It doesn't want to get too deep into that because then we'd have to delve into the biology of puberty and all the brain changes and physiological changes, and that will come next. The book is pretty clear that this is a time of growth and stability. And so when you think about what should we really focus on, what is really happening in middle childhood? And again, whenever I'm teaching, research methods and you always hit on naturalistic observation, it's always the one you kind of skip over because we're always more focused on quantitative or other forms of qualitative analysis. But when it comes to middle childhood, one of the best tools that we have is just to sit back and watch. Think about it. Look at your 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. What are they doing? Look at how they play. Look at how they're beginning to socialize. Look at how they're growing with their skills in school and how they're growing with their skills in sports, knowledge, language use. Their memories are growing because their experiences are growing and they're interacting in the social context. So they're learning how to play all the games. They're learning about all the movies, all the famous sports people, all the role models that are out there. They're taking it in like sponges. But again, what's most important during this time is that stability as they grow. Now, do kids need stability? Of course, we all need to mix it up in life. But again, having a consistent, routine during this time, having good nutrition, stable families, good quality education, is this how you really create a self-actualized human? And so again, if we were to apply behaviorist theory, and the idea that, what did Skinner say? Give me any kid and I can mold him into anything you want him to be. That is this time. Kids at this age, they haven't totally developed that prefrontal cortex yet. Their ability to still live in imaginary worlds and imaginary play that still exist, and I ask myself, at what point did we lose that? And then I also like to ask, maybe we didn't lose it, we just stopped doing it, Because I started thinking about like how kids, they can just take on roles and play all these crazy games. But I was just at Miss Saigon the other night watching actors take on these roles and play all these games and have so much fun. And so maybe it's us that changes, or maybe we just grow out of our childhood. That's a question I always ask whenever I'm teaching something like this. But again, at this age, 7 to about 11 or 12, that's when the kids are just perfect, I don't know how else to put it. When you look across the books, this is when the kids, get really into school, they're really into their peers, they want to be good. I don't know how else to put it, like, and then something happens and then juvenile delinquency occurs. So when I teach juvenile delinquency, all my lecture videos are on YouTube for that if you're ever interested. But again, something happens after that, and is it just that all these crazy biological changes kick in and the kids are just gone wild or something? I don't know. There's, I have to talk about all my lectures on that, but that's a whole different conversation. But again, for this one, just think about kids, 7 to 12. They listen to their teachers, they follow the rules, they genuinely care about how other people feel about them. They're trying not to look bad, they're becoming socially conscious, socially aware. Their personalities are really starting to form, their identities, the clothes they wear, the things they like, Are they opening up finally to new things, stop being such picky eaters at this age, etc., So a lot is happening during this age. The book doesn't go super deep into all the parts of the brain that are growing. But again, it's this time in our life that all the branches of our tree, like again, I was, the brain's like a tree, right? You got your branches, your that controls your, heartbeat and your breathing. And then you got your limbic system for all your emotion centers. And then you got your outer cortex for all your higher level thinking. But again, so all these neurons are interconnected, just like trees, and then branching into smaller branches and then leaves, think about it kind of like that. At this age, that's when all those dendrites, the branching of the brain, with the things that connect the neurons to each other so they can talk and the brain can talk to itself, this really comes about. So the book characterizes this age as slow and steady growth, and I like it, So basically, age 6 to 10 or 7 to 12 or whatever age range we want to put to middle childhood, they grow 2 inches and average 5 pounds. But again, this is the most healthy time in most people's lives. This 6 to 10 or 7 to 12, this is has the lowest death rate of any group, okay? If they, because again, it's infancy that genetic conditions are tend to be most lethal or old ages. Infectious diseases, we've probably become immune at this point, or we've learned how to fight it off. We're just mostly susceptible when we're young and we're old, especially to things like that. We're not at that juvenile age where we're starting to take crazy dangerous risks and do drugs yet, like older teenagers whose accidental death is 5 times higher than 6 to 10. So again, even the book says, look, 6 to 10 is the good years. After we got out of this, the accidental death rate is going to go up 5 times as much. So what happens after this? We'll be talking about that. However, it does say chronic health conditions like Tourette syndrome, stuttering, obesity, and allergies may worsen during middle adulthood. Your book goes into a pretty good discussion of obesity and allergies if you guys are interested in that. Check it out. Look at things that because again, genetics are going to play a role. Your environment's going to play a role. It looks into things like farm kids have less allergies. Why? Is it because they're exposed to more stuff than city kids, for example? So good questions here, but you can go off in a couple tangents if you like. Middle childhood is also the best time not only to learn about how to care for one's health. Again, these kids are learning how to shower by themselves and eat, and they're exercising a ton. And again, all of these things play a good role. So kids that develop these habits during this age, these kind of tend to be a little bit more lifelong too. So again, is it very important for kids in middle childhood to learn how to eat well? Good exercise, get involved in sports and games and, friends and, school and all of these things. Again, how do you make a well-rounded, self-actualized person? When it comes to biological growth, bones, brains, and teeth mature about 6 months earlier in girls than boys. So a bunch of side conversations that we can't get into in this class will go off in a bunch of tangents, but like why do girls do better in school? Is it because girls' bodies and brains mature before boys? Are girls more organized in school than boys because they're more physically and psychologically mature? And so girls become sexually active before the boys, and then you can go off on a whole bunch of rants, like what happens when girls are sexually or get their periods earlier. So girls that get their periods earlier, are they more susceptible to things like sexual violence? And there are correlations with that. Again, I go into all these rants in other classes like juvenile delinquency, looking at things like that. But again, there are some contrasts again in these gender differences. But again, as I've said with the gender differences, at this age, it's really hard to tell the boys from the girls in the ways they live their lives before puberty. And I keep asking the question, how really different are kids in middle childhood? Just because one's a girl and one's a boy, are they actually biologically different? Especially since like their gonads haven't signaled the, brain to release hormones to signal the beginning of puberty and then that whole anatomy conversation that comes after it. So again, lots of things to be questioning. In modern times, though, children are less active, but this is culturally dependent. Your book goes deep into looking at different cultures and the ways they live their lives and how that correlates with health and obesity and how they're spending their time, allergies, things along those lines. Again, kids that are living in apartments playing video games all day, they're not getting exposed to everything. So once they go hit the farm, all of a sudden their bodies maybe aren't ready for it. You know what I mean? Again, that gets into epigenetics and gene expression and this whole much larger conversation. But if you guys are interested in all of that, again, the more I study psychology, the more I have to delve into biology. But again, your book is quite clear that having kids write, do music, play sports, all these activities, learning to read, they activate the prefrontal cortex. They kickstart these advances in our, cognitive and fine and gross motor abilities, along with our reaction time and our selective attention. Practice makes perfect. Practice makes the brain grow. The more you interact and do things and learn and try things, the better and better you should probably become, even if it's slow and steady growth. Like my golfing, I don't know if I've gotten any better over the years because I don't really practice that much. But if I actually practiced a lot more, I'd be a lot better. My guitar playing, on the other hand, I play like every single day, and I can just do things that I can only dream of doing when I was a child and I'm an adult. So it's not like the learning, again, I couldn't do this until like my later adulthood, like 30s, 40s. Really, the last few years since I had my daughter, like 9 years ago. So when I really kickstarted my guitar playing. So like in my later 30s. But again, exercise is incredibly important for kids. Health, exercise, involvement, good positive stimuli, and lots of it. Being challenged, having to work at stuff. All of this stuff increases your cerebral blood flow and helps the neurons work and grow. The more you do things, the better your body is. Go for it. And again, it's that age that we should be, telling kids to go out and do these things. So, regarding intelligence and brain growth. Your aptitude is defined as your ability to master a skill or knowledge, okay? Ability. Achievement is what you've actually learned or attained, okay? You could also look at this as like, crystallized knowledge. It's not until you're older you have the crystallized knowledge, your achieved knowledge, what you've actually learned. But younger kids have a little bit more aptitude to learn things faster, new skills faster, incorporate new information faster, respond time faster. That's why in Jeopardy, the older you get, is it a little bit of a disadvantage because your response time slows, even though you have tons of crystallized knowledge? Your book also discusses IQ scores. Whenever we're going to be talking about our IQ test, remember we have to be extremely critical. The test only measures what it is designed to measure. Most IQ tests that you guys take only measure formal education. So only kids that have incredible formal education are going to have this ability to rock those IQ scores. So again, as psychologists, we always need to be extremely critical about how we're measuring things and then, you know, um, the conclusions we make about those scores. So again, you can take some kid in the hood who's never been to school, and of course that kid's not going to do great on like an IQ test that studies like formal knowledge you learn in school. But maybe that kid has like some other rocking skills when it comes to like engineering, taking apart motorcycles, putting cars back together. I'm speaking of a best friend. You know what I mean? I have a best friend who never went to school, but he can tear apart things like nobody else, and pieces are everywhere, and he can put it back together, and it's all absolute gibberish to me. So again, your book hints on this idea of multiple intelligence. So again, through linguistic, it's missing an L there, linguistic, language skills, logical or mathematical skills, musical skills, spatial skills, bodily kinesthetic, your movement, interpersonal, social understanding, and intrapersonal self-understanding, along with naturalistic, understanding nature and the environment you live in, and then also spiritual or existential intelligence, thinking about life, death, philosophy, and all those things in between. Usually, when you do tests of intelligence, we apply something called a G score. And a G score should just be, all of your scores put together into some generalized score. And then your book also hits on this idea of plasticity. As I was saying with guitar playing, don't think that just because you're old, you can't learn. Your brain is always making new neurons and you can always learn new tricks. However, yes, learning language can be a little bit harder when you get older. Learning new skills, it might take a little bit longer for various processes. But again, what really dictates things like intelligence, one, genetics. Genetics play a huge factor, not race genetics. Because again, people from Africa are not different than people from Europe, and they're not different from people from Asia. That's just all a myth. But individual parents on all the continents, that does play a role. Okay. The other part is your own personal motivation, emotions, drive, ambition, inspiration. Do you like what you're learning? Your ability to incorporate knowledge into your memory, whatever it might be. And then the social part may be the most important. Because again, kids growing up in poverty, they're not going to be challenged as much. They're not going to be taught to get their brain to grow as much. So factors like poverty can play a huge role. Quality of school that you're going to, access to information. What type of information are you consuming? How much time are you spending consuming that information? Okay. So your book kind of wraps up with this idea of neurodiversity. And again, going off of intelligence, all of us are different. All of us have the inborn capabilities that we have. Some people can do math better. Like I took AP chemistry, and in that class, I realized I'll never be the smartest kid because those kids could just rock AP chemistry. But you know what? They didn't have social lives like I did, and they couldn't pick up girls like I could. Ha 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 ha. Again, just being arrogant for the fun of it. But again, did I have better social skills and they had better math skills so they could do chemistry better? And again, maybe that's very true because I spent so much of my time always hanging out with girls and trying to be social and making friends. And I didn't spend as much time maybe doing other stuff like math that would have made me better at doing things like AP calculus, AP chemistry, AP physics. Is that why I'm like a psychology and sociology professor? Because I'm scared of the math. But even with psychology, you have to know math and you have to know chemistry. Like if you're going to talk about the body and neurons releasing neurotransmitters, neurotransmitters are chemicals. Hormones, your body's system for talking with the brain, are chemicals, you know? So again, you have to understand chemistry, biology. You want to do quantitative statistics and prove points in psychology, you have to know math and numbers. So even though it's not like my greatest skill, I still can do it enough to be able to get a PhD in psychology and be able to have the opportunity to give these wonderful lectures to you all. So again, I'm very critical of diagnosing anything as a disorder, and we always should be very critical and very hesitant to diagnose anything. For example, autism. It's an autism spectrum disorder, right? Is it a disorder? Autistics, especially the savant types that can then reproduce what they're taking in. For example, like Stephen Wiltshire, the autistic, they fly him in a helicopter over Rome for like 7 minutes, and then he'll go home and draw all of Rome to scale from memory. So again, autism shows you what the human brain could be capable of if our attention worked in a different way. So, is it an attention disorder or is it an attention working a different way person? Again, questions we should always be asking. ADHD, is it because maybe they don't have ADHD? Maybe the kid just can't sit still for 8 hours a day in a formal education system. Your book goes very deep into this. Your book starts talking about ADHD and it actually looked at age and it found that, kids that start kindergarten later had the higher rates of ADHD. Why? Because maybe they're a little bit more advanced than everybody else, and maybe they're getting a little bored. Questions. But then again, there are some chemical factors, some actual physical biological factors that register for ADHD that weigh into the diagnosis of it. So again, brain structures play a role in ADHD diagnosis, cognition, emotion, motivation play a role in it, but also the social context. Some countries don't have any psychological disorders. People walk around with AK-47s and that's just a way of life. But in America, 25% of people at some point in their life get diagnosed. So again, think about how culture plays a role. So when we're going to go label something as abnormal, remember, we all have biases within this cultural framework. And so often you have to step outside of your cultural framework and really look at things from various perspectives before we label something as abnormal. For a long time, being gay was labeled as abnormal. But if you go back even farther, Alexander the Great, in the entire Roman Empire, men had sex with other men. Yes, you weren't allowed to look as submissive man, you had to be dominant, which meant like the dominant man would be having sex with a slave, a prostitute, or an entertainer. But homosexuality's in human DNA and has always been there. Is it really abnormal? Do people really get hurt from somebody being gay? Does it really cause a breakdown in society? questions we need to be asking. But until 1973, the American Psychological Association labeled gay as abnormal behavior and a disorder. So again, we need to question things. If you go back further in human history, humans generally are poly. Monogamy is a more modern invention. Poly is ancient humanity. So again, let that sit in. Watch my psychology of sexuality lectures. It'll blow your mind on some of these things. Okay. So again, what we label as a disability, a disorder, we need to question. But again, I had you guys do a good assignment on this and go through all of the genetic disorders, all of the potential sex disorders, and then other psychological disorders, including things like ADHD, which is a biopsychosocial disorder, autism, same thing, biological processes in the brain play a role, and then that causes them to struggle with the ability to be social. Why do men more likely to have autism than females? Just questions like this that we should always be asking. Okay. All right, so morbidity is the disorder. Comorbid is having more than one disorder. And then premorbidity is anybody's ability to get one in their lifetime. Are they more vulnerable because of their genetics? Are they more vulnerable to disorders because of their environment? But again, we should always be aware of misdiagnoses, the misuse of drugs, and then labeling typical behavior as pathological. But again, as with most things, when we come across either genetic disorders or psychological disorders or just issues interacting in the social context, because a lot of kids are going to struggle with that. Sometimes it's hard to get to school. I mean, I didn't even mention this throughout this whole lecture, but again, during this time, the kids what's most on their mind again is them going out in the world. And your book kind of opens up with this idea, but the kids have to figure out how to go to school and get along with others. They have to figure out how to make friends, figure out how to belong to the group. And again, this can be some of the hardest stuff. So again, having that early intervention to help kids feel like they belong, get them connected to society, hooked into a good quality education system, good family and social support, and then all the health needs they have, you give a kid all that, they end up pretty well. All right, appreciate y'all, and thank you so much.